Here we go. All right, it is 3 o'clock, so welcome everyone. I'm sure more folks will be joining us as we get along, but we're going to get started. My name is Marie Eagle with the ARC of Michigan, and on behalf of the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services and the ARC, I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Today's topic is documenting your person-centered planning process. And we have Laura Demeuse, the self-determination analyst for the department, with us to present on this topic. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Laura, so you can go ahead and start sharing yours. As we had on the welcome screen, just a couple of housekeepings. Everyone has been muted and videos are turned off. You can submit a question in the chat. We will be holding questions until the end of today's presentation. If you do not have your question answered during today's presentation, please let us know and we will shoot you an answer over email. We do not offer CEUs for these webinars, but we will be sending out a PDF of the presentation to all participants. The presentation is also being recorded and will be able to be found on the ARC's website. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Laura, and please enjoy today's presentation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Let's get started. So we talk a lot about person-centered planning, but not so much about the process. And today we're going to go over some things. First, about the law around the person-centered planning process, what the process actually is, your job or role as a person writing that plan, whether you're a case manager, support coordinator, maybe wraparound facilitator. The reason that we use this process, documentation of the process, of course, that this is really a team sport and that we should never be feeling like we have to do everything by ourselves. And lastly, we'll talk about some, I guess, extra credit of dignity of risk. So first of all, for 25 years, part of our state law and in the mental health code has been that the person-centered planning process is used to develop and written the individual plan of service in partnership with the person receiving services. So it is our duty, from the state down to the PHD, the CMH, et cetera, to really clearly link those two things together. They're not separate. By law, the plan of service has to be person-centered. And we tend to focus on that planning part, but not really the rest. So I'm going to walk you through kind of, how that process kind of works, how to kind of document that process actually happened. And a lot of the first half is really going to be a little more nebulous on documentation. We'll be talking about some things that we just kind of hope happens overall, that you're not necessarily writing a sentence in a certain place in the document that says this happened, but that there's a general overall tone or things that you want to make sure that you're doing in that process that will be captured through the way that you write. So hopefully you'll kind of get a sense of how we can do that through that process. And we'll have questions at the end. So if something is confusing or you don't really understand how to make that happen, we can talk about it then. So if during the course of this presentation, none of this sounds familiar to you or like something that you currently do, then you're probably writing a service-centered plan and not a person-centered plan. So the question is, did the process happen? The person-centered planning process is kind of this almost secretive part of our work. And it's understandable if you don't really understand the process really well, because you might not have been trained on this process. There's not a lot of time when people come into services or when they come into their job or get a new caseload or whatever happens, because people's lives can't be put on hold. So you have to go and start working, whether you kind of know what you're supposed to be doing or not. And that's understandable. It's okay. So the first thing that you really need to understand about this process is that it's ongoing. And these things are kind of somehow implied, right? That you're just supposed to kind of know that the process is ongoing and you're really working on that planning piece all year long. Some of us kind of get into a mode where you did your meeting, you kick up your feet for the rest of the year, you feel like you don't have to do anything. But really, you actually are continuing that process throughout the year. So what's happening during that whole time is a learning process or discovery. So when you first meet somebody, you're getting to know them as an individual. You're getting to discover, what their different, not only their needs are, but their strengths and their vision of what a good life is. And that's continual, because if you look back at your life, probably things that you wanted last year, you might have something different that you want to work on this year, or what you think would be a quality of life, now compared to 5 years ago, for example. So we're always continuously learning and figuring out, who this person is and what's driving them, and really helping them to be able to drive their own person-centered planning process. So part of your role in this is to constantly be providing information and assistance. And that includes, hopefully in the beginning of the service process, what person-centered planning is and what a person should expect from that person-centered planning process as they go through this experience. You don't get person-centered planning anywhere else. You don't go to the mall or the doctor's office even, and really experience what person-centered planning is. So there's nobody that's coming into services knowing what to expect. So it's our job to really help them understand. And hopefully, if something's not going the way that they understand it, they'll be able to kind of advocate for themselves and say, hey, I thought that this was supposed to happen, in a way that I get to choose when and where the meeting is, for example. That didn't happen. What's going on, right? So, and then the last part of this process is that through all this learning, discovery, information, that we're increasing support for this person. And this is, kind of my first thing that I'm introducing that I kind of look for in documentation for this plan of service is that there's some kind of increased support for this person. So that would mean maybe new ideas, new learning opportunities, maybe new activities the person is doing, community links to all of those community access things, whether that's the why or anything in the community, because that's a big part of supports coordination, new friends, allies, new acquaintances, progress in general on the goals because of something new that was added through that person-centered planning process. So I like to kind of distinguish the person-centered planning process because in policy, they literally talk about person-centered planning process versus what I call a person-centered process. So there's literally a part of the process that is you're planning for the meeting and doing like kind of that work. However, all of it is person-centered planning. So I just call this everything else the person-centered process, just to kind of give it a little bit of differentiation. So, but the main thing about the whole process that we're doing is that this person is really trying to control their own life. They're driving what's happening. And so it's our jobs to really facilitate them to do that. And this process really happens in phases. So you have kind of that discovery and the pre-planning, which is kind of everything that happens before that really getting hard into planning phase, which is a little bit different than you might think of it now, because pre-planning is kind of our document and we look at it, we check off the person got to check, when and where and who's going to be at their meeting, et cetera. But that's really getting into like kind of the harder planning phase. And you can really make a robust pre-planning experience where you're really doing a lot of the heavy lifting of getting to that meeting part. And you're really kind of figuring out like, what is this person's vision of a good life? What are their goals? What are the things and services that they might want to help them reach those goals, et cetera? And then you move into like the hard planning and convening, I like to call it, because if we just call it a meeting, then people think of it as a one-time thing. So we convene in our meetings, because they might be multiple meetings, to kind of get with that person and their team and really drive the plan. And then we go through the authorization process and implementation. So that's kind of the whole person-centered process altogether. And the main part of this person-centered process is that we're really looking for everything to be done with the person, not to or for the person. So again, the person's in control, they're driving, and you're really trying to support them and find other people to help them do things, in a partnership. And then the last thing that is really imperative for working in behavioral health is to really understand that behavior is communication. We have a ton of people that we work with that maybe don't communicate in a verbal way, in a typical way. And sometimes we're looking at this in a very negative way. And it's easier to look at a negative behavior and just say, we just want to stop this. And so our plan ends up being, how can we just stop this behavior? But the real issue is to figure out, like, why is this happening to begin with? You want to make sure that everything that you're doing is really trying to understand what is happening and why, and beginning to kind of make a picture, because usually these are the people that we have a hard time getting a real story on, really understanding what's going on. And if we're watching that behavior, we can really start to find out the reason behind the behavior, what we can do to change the behavior, and then move towards a more positive outcome. So when we talk about changing that behavior, the idea a lot of times in behavior, psychological behavior, is not that you're really trying to change the person, but you're actually changing their environment. So if you have somebody who, say, is eloping a lot, what is it about this person when they're eloping, why they're eloping, and is there some way that you can kind of change the person's access to a different, safer way that they can get out of the house, for example? Can they go into a fenced backyard or something? Is there a way to change the behavior and the environment? Change the environment through their, by changing their behavior, you're changing the environment and allowing them a different way to cope with whatever's going on with them. Sorry about the word salad. And so then again, when you're going into this planning session, we're looking for some positive solutions to those behaviors and not necessarily so-and-so is going to follow their behavior plan to stop this, whatever this behavior is. We're looking for that from that person's perspective, what's important to them, to kind of use that to help plan and come up with some solutions for their plan. So all of this that we're talking about is what I like to call interdependence. And basically what we're looking for there is the person that's representing the CMH really working with this person again. And so even the federal government now is talking about being able to co-design a plan. So again, the person's in the driver's seat, and the person that the supports coordinator, case manager, the person working with them is there to kind of be by their side and really be that kind of expert about what the system can do for them and what they need to be able to include in their plan, and also the services that are there to support them in the different ways that they can be supported. So really the whole situation is about that learning, discovery, figuring out who this person is, and then being able to kind of translate, their dreams, desires, etc., into a well-written plan. And a huge part of this is listening. So sometimes this means listening, with your eyes instead of your ears. And I hope that you've heard that before, because again, we're looking for behavior, we're looking for signs and symptoms and ways that we can identify, what this person is really trying to tell us. And again, a lot of this is kind of documented, not necessarily that you're writing this down in a sentence like I listened to this person, but that you're writing in a way that the language is positive, it's not clinical. You're writing, in the person's words that you kind of heard exactly what they're looking for and what they are asking for in their plan. Another really important thing is really trying to make sure that your plan reflects that we're not making a separate standard for anyone. So an example of this would be maybe you're working with a 6-year-old who can't chew solid foods. And, typically around this time of year, most kids are getting ready for Halloween, right? So we wouldn't say, this child's not going to participate in Halloween because they can't chew solid food and therefore candy is out the door, right? You would have to figure out an accommodation for them. So does this child want to participate in Halloween? And if there's anything else besides the fact that they can't have candy, are there accommodations that can be made? Maybe this person really would love to get dressed up. Maybe they really love to go talk to their neighbors. Maybe any of the wonderful things that you can experience during Halloween, if you celebrate Halloween, can be accommodated so that that child can still participate. So just making sure that the plan overall is really fitting into this person's stage of life so that they're kind of doing the same things, but with, the accommodations and support to make that a viable thing that's going to happen for them. And then lastly, again, we want to make sure that these decisions that people are making are made by the person or with the person. So even if the person has a guardian, there really should be, and this is part of the home and community-based settings rule, is that there really should be decisions coming from this person, even if they have a guardian. So if that person needs support to be able to communicate what those decisions are, then we help give them that support. But we really want to see in that plan that the decisions are coming from them and not someone else. So a huge part of the person-centered planning process that I think has gotten lost is self-determination. And if you're not aware, we are kind of doing this huge movement where we're trying to distinguish between they're the same, but self-determination and self-directed services, we're trying to distinguish between those two, because what's been happening is that when we talk about self-determination, it's been linked to a way of delivering services, which is self-directed services. And people would say, well, you don't have self-determination because you don't have a budget. And that's not really what person-centered planning is about at all. Person-centered planning at its core is about self-determination. And that's why I'm talking all about, the person driving and making all the decisions, because at its core, person-centered planning is all about self-determination, which the tenets of self-determination are really about this independence, productivity, and community inclusion. And so what I mean, and what even the Medicaid manual talks about, is independence means being free of other people's intentions or having free will. Independence, like I can tie my own shoes, is great, and that might lead to independence in the way that we mean it in the Medicaid manual, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about when we talk about independence, productivity, and community inclusion. So we want to find out somewhere in this document, hopefully, kind of where a person is already at with their independence. How readily are they able to make their own decisions? What communication skills do they have? How often are they able to self-advocate? Productivity is really about, do I know I can do something well? And community inclusion is really about relationships. Yes, we want everybody to be a part of their community, but the ultimate intent of that is that people are able to go out and on a regular basis, time over time, and really get to know the people in their community and have relationships with people that they feel like they have meaningful relationships with other people, and that other people are important to them as in their relationships towards them. So there's a give and take to it, right? So we want the baseline, where the person's at, and then those actual goals and objectives that you write. When you write a goal for community inclusion, for example, we just want to see that somewhere that these things we're trying to increase these things, if this person wants to increase those things, of course, or maybe maintain some of these things. So those things, I think, are pretty obvious where they'd be documented in the plan. So now we get to kind of the examples. So the first thing, and this is maybe new to a lot of people, but one of the easiest ways for you to show that a person-centered planning process happened is to put a summary of the meeting, a narrative of the meeting in your plan. And some EMRs have a nice space for this. Some you might have to kind of repurpose, like a strengths, needs, abilities, preferences box, or something else to kind of put this in here. But I'm going to show you in the next 6 slides, like how you can get a ton of information out of just a short paragraph about kind of what happened at the meeting. So this is my example about Bill. And you'll see that in this summary, Bill is a real person. He's good at skating. He likes to make people laugh. He has a friend named Steve. He's a good self-advocate, helps with chores, volunteers with animals, loves the water, can dance really well, apparently, according to himself. He would like to be able to ride the bus on his own because he wants to see his girlfriend after work. So you can kind of generally get a sense of, like, Bill's a real person and he has people who are important to him, and he has things he does with his life, and he has goals, right? He has a story. You can also capture kind of his likes and dislikes. So you can kind of assume that if he's good at making people laugh and does it on a regular basis, that he probably likes to make people laugh, that he likes to be kind, that he likes his friend Steve, that he likes animals in the water and hopefully dancing, because usually people like to do the things that they like to do really well, or that they can do really well. And then I would argue that his dislikes are that he can't see his girlfriend as often as he wants to. And in here, we also have his strengths, which kind of mirror a lot of his story, but we're writing a strengths-based plan. So a lot of what we're talking about in the summary is really focusing on strengths and not worrying so much about whatever Bill's deficits are, because that's already going to be captured in his assessment and his needs and all the supports that are there to support Bill. So we kind of talk about all of his strengths, and I don't think, I put that he holds doors open for people, has kind eyes. I think those are the new ones that I didn't already read. And so you can get those two, as well as preferences. I would assume preferences are, that he wants to advocate for himself. He wants to hold the doors open for people. He wants to be in the water when he can, and he wants to see his girlfriend at work. And preferences can go a little bit deeper than this. And if you record preferences in a methodology or an intervention part of the plan, that's even better, because really what preferences are, when they're most impactful, is when you're talking about how services will be delivered. So, I mean, something as simple as Bill likes to have his peanut butter and jelly sandwich cut it diagonally or whatever. That's his preference. We all go to different stores or purchase different services, go to the doctor, etc., and they will deliver things in a certain way, right? You order a hamburger, you get whatever's on the hamburger, but your preferences are that you can change that to your liking. So at Subway or wherever, you can kind of get exactly what you want. And so those preferences are really there so that person can drive the way that services are delivered for them. So that's really what you want to look for is, maybe Bill needs a restrictive diet for some reason, but he really loves cheeseburgers. So it's his preference that the nutritionists figure out, staying within his diet, that he still gets to eat a cheeseburger once in a while. Something like that. And then, of course, we have important 2 and important 4, which are huge tenets of person-centered planning. And it's really important that you figure out, what these things are for people. You can get them from the SIS, you can get them from, the person-centered planning meeting itself. But, for him, it's important that he be able to ride his bus on his own so he can see his girlfriend after work. And it's important for him, that we look at his safety, because he's never ridden the bus on his own. So, just throwing him out there to ride the bus without any direction or training would probably not be a good idea. And then lastly, we really get to, from this narrative, a short narrative about what we discussed in the meeting, we get kind of to his goals. Ultimately, yeah, he wants to work on riding the bus, but the reason is that he wants to be able to see his girlfriend after work. So really kind of digging down to the why of, a person might say, I want a job, or I want to ride the bus, or whatever they say. But really kind of, if you get down to the why, you'll find out like what's really going to motivate this person. So if we really want to see actual outcomes from the plans we write, we want to make sure that the plan is meaningful to them. And you're really looking for writing that plan. You want to write goals in the person's words. And this is as simple as literally whatever comes out of this person's mouth, you put in quotes. So that can work just fine, but you also want to make sure that your goals and objectives are clear. So I'm sure we've all been to planning meetings and people have said like birds or I want to be Santa Claus or something that is not exactly clear. So again, you just want to dig down into, okay, well, what does birds mean to you? And you can absolutely put birds in quotes, but next to it kind of say, birds are very important to Joan because they reduce her anxiety. So she would like to be able to spend time with birds, whatever that means for that person. And what it really needs to be clear is we talk about measurable goals and objectives, but really your goals can, again, be just what the person says. The objectives are what makes the goals measurable. And something else to really keep at the forefront of your mind is objectives, when they're measurable, we're really talking about, if we're talking about Joan and her birds. So you might write an objective that Joan's going to go to the atrium where there's birds on the weekends for 2 hours with her friend or whatever, right? So there's a measurable component of that objective. But when you're talking about amount, scope, and duration, that's a huge part of, our audits and making sure things are medically necessary, et cetera. Those are clearly and strictly for the services. So don't get the person's plan that's really about their life mixed up with the services and supports. Because what you're doing is writing a plan for this person and then taking those services to support them to get to their goals and objectives as they wrote in their plan of service or their person-centered plan. And the other thing we want to look for is when you link strengths to objectives. So, for example, we might write an objective for Bill who wants to learn to ride the bus, right? So we might say like, he's going to learn to ride the bus he's going to learn the bus route in order to get him and his girlfriend to and from the ice skating rink once a month. So in the narrative, it talked about how Bill he was really good at ice skating. So we take those things that a person's already good at and already has going for them, and we link it to an objective so that we can kind of build upon that. Because believe it or not, when people are good at things and we help them do it more, then they're going to get even better at that thing. And we work with a lot of people that their world is full of people telling them the things they can't do and what their deficits are. And part of building up a psychological well-being for them is to really help them focus on what they are good at. And again, all of this must be in the person's control. So the objectives should always be something that the person can actually do, and they actually have an opportunity to change the circumstances of whatever that is. So nothing that's going to be done to them or for them, but you want to write it in a way that puts them in the driver's seat. So don't write, staff will ensure Richard is taking his medications as prescribed every day. Write something like, Richard will set up his medications weekly and then make sure he is taking them at the correct times every day with staff assistance. So there you can see that Richard now is in the driver's seat instead of saying something that the staff is going to do for him. And lastly, we want to really talk about this all being a team sport. I think a lot of support coordinators and case managers feel like they have to be responsible for everything. They have to know everything. They have to plan everything. They have to do everything. And that just leads to burnout. And so the best way to really deal with this is to build circles of support. Real interdependence depends on this team building. Like, don't try to do this alone. Look for family and friends and neighbors and, community resources, people that you can bring in to help support this person. If this person is into gardening, find other people who like gardening, etc., and really bring them on, because then you're increasing the chances that this person is actually going to meet their goals. And possibly, if you get them enough support, they might even be able to graduate out of services because they'll have a strong enough team to kind of get them through that they don't have to rely on our services anymore. So everything can run a lot more smoothly. People have more creative solutions and ideas when they're, you're working with maybe 5 heads instead of just you. And it takes a lot of pressure off of you trying to kind of go it alone, right? Then you're not taking phone calls every day from somebody being angry about something and not really knowing what direction to go to help. So this would probably, the building circles would probably be documented in a pre-planning document, that you invited a number of people instead of just the case manager and the person. So we don't want to get stuck in a rut either. If we've got somebody that has been trying something year after year after year and nothing is changing, we really want to see that this is actually being reviewed. Not that you check the box that it was reviewed, but that we're actually saying, like, last year we had a goal for you to get a new job and you're still in the same old job. Like, why is that? And maybe this goal is too big, or maybe we want to work on something else. Really have that discussion, and then give yourself credit and document that you've reviewed that old plan, and based on that review, you've altered the new one. And then again, when you support somebody with multiple people, the likelihood of them making progress on their objectives and thus having really good outcomes goes way up. So we want to see that progress, especially if progress is being made. Make sure you give yourself credit and document it. And lastly, dignity of risk, which is, I don't know, a concept that I'm not sure has been talked about quite enough. But dignity of risk is something that if you've got a person that you're supporting and you're really helping them have as much self-determination as possible, there should be some time that a person is coming to you saying, I would like to do X, whatever that is. Let's say someone who has very limited movement in their hands wants to learn how to cook on the stove. There's all kinds of issues that you're worried, the person might burn themselves, they might, cut themselves eating, starting prep, or maybe they can't even hold a knife to actually prep food or whatever. So you figure out, instead of saying like, you know what, we're just going to let your staff cook for you, you figure out like, what are the risks of this person being able to do this, and then figure out how to mitigate those risks. Maybe we buy pre-cut carrots or whatever for whatever food this person wants to make, and make sure that there's a way that, or they have a safety glove they wear when they're using a knife so that they're not going to cut themselves, etc. So instead of just kind of saying, no, we're not going to do that, we really work with the person to figure out how we can problem solve and make this happen. And again, if we're really doing a really good job and a person is really directing their lives, we should see more conflict, that someone is really kind of saying, no, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it no matter what. And that there's somebody that's going to have to really go through a negotiation period with them. And so I threw up this risk matrix, because negotiation of that risk, you really want to be able to figure out, what is the likelihood that something bad is going to happen? And if something bad happens, how bad is it going to be? So if we're at this, number 10, where almost certainly something catastrophically horrible is going to happen, that might be a place where we can say, like, no, this is very, very dangerous. We need to figure out how to pull this back to something, that's going to be at a risk that's more negligible. And being able to educate this person and help them understand why we're negotiating the way we are, is really helpful in trying to really give that person dignity of risk. And so then again, just having some documentation that you had that conversation, that somebody said, I want to go for walks outside by myself, but I don't know how to cross the street safely, for example. Like, that you guys really sat down and figured out a way that that could happen. Make sure, again, that that's documented in the plan. That's kind of what it's all about. And then lastly, for goodness sake, celebrate. If you've got people that are making even an inch of progress, celebrate that. Make sure that even if, you're not seeing tons of progress, maybe every time you actually have a planning meeting, you're just using that time to really say, hey, we made it through another year. We're all here. We're going to do great things this year. Get people really excited about, the next year and what you've got planned for that year. Because if you're really trying to get to a person to a place where they're driving what's going on in their life and their vision is really making everything work, then you have a lot to celebrate for. So make sure that you take time, and even inside the document, writing that staff should be able to praise and acknowledge, when somebody is doing something well. Even that's a little tiny celebration. So try to give you lots of time for questions. And I was wondering if anybody has any questions for me.
Laura, we did have a question submitted in the chat, and I'll just read it as it was typed. It says, I have recently heard auditors say goals and objectives need to be SMART. Is it accurate to say that the goals need to be person-centered, individualized, and meaningful, while it's the objectives that need to be SMART?
Yes. And the auditors will tell you that as well, that the objectives are really what makes the goals measurable. So, and I really think about it, SMART always seems daunting to me. It seems a little scary, especially because you are working with all of these people who are individuals, and they all have individual needs and different objectives for every single one of them, right? So it's hard to kind of magically make every single objective meet every single one of those specific measurable time constrained, et cetera, et cetera. So how I look at it is, once you've written that out, does the person, have they identified for you, like we'll use Bill, for example, he wants to ride the bus. Like, in order for him to be able to get to a point where he can ride the bus independently, what does he think? How often does he need to do that? For how long, over the course of that year, let's say, to be able to actually get to a place where he can ride the bus. So as long as you have those things in your objective, and again, it can be Bill is doing X, Y, and Z for this amount of time. A lot of people write, habilitative goals. People are going to take showers or brush their teeth or whatever the thing is. Well, what defines, I know that we basically get the concept of what brushing your teeth is or taking a shower, but what does that mean to this person? Like, there are people who can take showers in 2 minutes. There are people who like to sit in there for an hour. Like, how long does a person actually need to get in a shower and actually do what it takes to get them clean, for example? So those are the things that you want to make sure, as far as a SMART goal or SMART objective, that you're putting in that objective. And that's about as technical as it gets. And again, your amount, scope, and duration, you just want to make sure, in order for Bill to ride the bus, he needs CLS staff for however many hours, units, blah, 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 so that they can actually support him to meet his goal of riding the bus, probably along with a lot of other things. But you'll put all of that in the methodology or intervention section so that he can be supported to meet his life plan.
So to clarify that answer, thank you. Do you know, is there a standard in existence that could be cited that does require a SMART objective in a plan?
I don't know in Michigan, like in Michigan law, if there's a standard. It is very common in the federal law. I don't think, like, if you go to any of the federal rules or anything, like it's going to actually say SMART goals in there, but they do talk about as a technical guidance that things should be SMART. And unfortunately, I think because we come out of Medicaid world, which is a medical model, right, that SMART goals are very much, that medical standard. So it's not so much that we're worried about the SMART as that I think that you should be able to, whatever you write in that objective, you should be able to visualize, like, I can see what this person is doing and what the results of them doing it are going to be, what it'll look like when they've achieved whatever that objective is. So that's kind of how you would know that your objective is measurable.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any more questions in the chat. Reminder, if you do have a question, please feel free to type it into the chat, and Laura can answer it.
Sorry, I think I put the chat on the screen there. Sorry about that. Well, I'd love it if you guys do have any questions, please feel free to email. I am we're coming up with some quality measures in the site review, kind of looking for, did this person-centered planning process actually happen? So, we work in a field, unfortunately, where if you don't document something, it didn't happen. So we really want to see some really good plans. We've, I think, kind of fallen away from, really good quality person-centered planning. And I think, to no fault of anyone's, just kind of lost touch with what exactly we're in the business of doing and really focusing on that person and what their needs are.
Laura, we have had a couple of more questions come up. One of them is asking if you have a sample list of SMART objectives that would pertain to sample goals. Or if not, maybe we could work on one and provide it to participants following the presentation.
I will think about that. I think the state has been reluctant always to give out examples just because they don't want people kind of cutting and pasting whatever example the state gives out and then sticking in their goals. Not that any of you lovely people would do that, but I think that's just the, if the state kind of blesses this particular objective, then all of a sudden we're going to see it everywhere, is kind of the thought process. And because we're working on person-centered plans and not, cut and paste plans, we don't want to see that.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, could you elaborate on the medically necessary plan versus supports?
Sure. I think I at least understand the first part of that. So, our medical necessity, and I think people get really caught up in this. In the Medicaid manual, we really talk about, we have our medical necessity established from your assessed needs in your assessment, right? And the assessment informs the plan of service. And basically, you should have kind of an idea of, what this person is eligible for supports before you even get to the planning meeting. And that planning meeting is kind of the stamp that says, okay, this is what we're actually doing and this is what's medically necessary at this time. So you want to be able to document in there, again, from what the need is, again, around those services, and not necessarily in the person-centered plan. Not that they're two separate documents, but I'd like to kind of remind people about those services are just there to support that plan. And so you want them to be linked. Like if someone has like a CLS, but you're only saying they need to go to their psychiatry appointments or something in their plan, like that's not linking together, right? So the auditors and need to be able to see a connection between whatever services are authorized and what's going on in the plan and how that service is going to support that person to get there. So between that assessment And that linkage, you got your medical necessity, and the Medicaid provider manual really talks about that independence, community inclusion, productivity, as well as really being able to document and put all of this in the plan and to finalize it is really what kind of solidifies that medical necessity for this person. So your assessment, and you talk about your golden thread all through that process, is really what's going to get you a medical necessity. I don't know, was the person saying like other supports that aren't Medicaid services? Was that what they were asking with that?
I am not certain if that person would like to expand on that question in the chat. We can follow up again. I'm not seeing any other questions right now. So it looks like we might be able to end a little bit early this month. I want to thank Laura for her presentation and her information today. And if you did have a question that you wanted to ask, please feel free to reach out. Laura's contact information is on this slide. So thank you, everyone, for participating today. And thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.